Daniel had only been living in the old Victorian house for 3 weeks when he first heard it. At 2:17 a.m., a low creak echoed through the hallway outside his bedroom door. At first, he thought it was the wood settling, the kind of harmless groan any old house might make. But when it came again, long, deliberate, almost rhythmic, he sat upright in bed. It didn't sound like the house shifting. It sounded like footsteps, slow and dragging, moving just outside his door. The air in his room grew thick, cold enough to raise goosebumps on his arms. He held his breath and listened, straining in the silence. The sound stopped, but the stillness was worse. He had the overwhelming sense that someone or something was standing right outside, waiting. Then, faintly, a whisper threaded through the dark. "Daniel!" Daniel froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. He tried to convince himself he had imagined it. Just the wind slipping through the old window frames, maybe. But the way his name had been spoken, drawn out, intimate, almost coaxing, was unmistakable. Summoning his courage, he slipped out of bed and crept to the door. The floorboards betrayed him with a groan underfoot, and he winced, waiting for something, anything, to react. Nothing. With trembling fingers, he gripped the doorknob and turned it slowly. The hinges squealed softly as the door cracked open. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by the weak glow of a nightlight plugged into an outlet near the stairs. It looked empty, silent, but as his eyes adjusted, Daniel noticed something that made his stomach lurch. On the wallpaper opposite his room, smeared in a dark, greasy streak, was a handprint. A handprint that hadn't been there the night before. Daniel stepped closer, his throat tightening. The handprint was large, too large. Its long fingers ending in claw-like smudges, as though whoever left it had dragged their nails down the wall. He reached out without thinking, touching the mark. The substance was tacky, faintly oily, and left a residue on his fingertips. He sniffed it, metallic, sharp, unmistakably like blood. He staggered back, nearly tripping over his own feet, his eyes darting up and down the hallway. It was empty, silent, and then he noticed something else. The handprint wasn't alone. Further down the hall, just past the stairwell, another one glistened faintly in the weak light. And then another, leading downward, an eerie trail of crimson palms descending the steps, vanishing into the heavy darkness below. As he stared, the air shifted again, colder, pressing against his skin like unseen fingers. And from the base of the stairs, just beyond sight, came the faintest sound. A wet, dragging breath. Daniel's stomach churned as the ragged breath grew louder, rising and falling in uneven gasps. His body screamed at him to retreat back to his room, to lock the door, to hide under the covers like a child. But some other pull, curiosity, dread, something darker, kept him frozen. The handprints led straight to the door at the bottom of the stairs. A door Daniel hadn't opened since moving in. The realtor had brushed it off as just the old basement. Nothing worth seeing until you get around to remodeling. But now, in the dead silence of the night, he noticed something he hadn't before. The door wasn't flush with the frame. It bulged outward slightly, as though something on the other side was pressing against it. His hand, slick with sweat, tightened on the banister as he descended each step. The boards groaned under his weight. The breath seemed to match his movements, wheezing louder each time he lowered his foot. When he reached the bottom, the door gave a soft thud, like something inside had shifted forward, sensing him. And then 3 deliberate knocks echoed from behind it. The sound reverberated through the wood, sharp and hollow, vibrating up Daniel's arms as he stood frozen before the door. He pressed himself back against the wall, staring at the handle, half expecting it to turn on its own. But it didn't. Instead, silence crept back, heavier than before. His ears strained against it, every muscle in his body coiled tight. And then, just when he began to think it was over, the knocks came again. This time, faster, harder. Bang, bang, bang. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to run, to bolt up the stairs and never look back. But his feet wouldn't obey. He reached for the knob almost without realizing it, compelled by some force he couldn't name. His hand hovered there, trembling inches away. That's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. From the narrow crack at the bottom of the basement door, a thick, black liquid was beginning to seep out. Slow at first, then faster, pooling at his bare feet. And with it came a smell so putrid and sweet it made him gag. The stench of rot. Daniel swallowed hard, gagging on the stench as the black liquid continued to spread across the floor. His hand, slick and trembling, finally gripped the doorknob. He twisted it slowly, dreading the moment it would give way. The door creaked open, revealing the basement. Darkness stretched endlessly, thick and suffocating. The weak beam of his phone flashlight cut through it, illuminating damp stone walls and old furniture shrouded in dust. First, it seemed empty. Relief washed over him, brief and foolish. Then he saw it, the walls. Every inch of them, scribbled in what looked like fresh, dark blood, were messages. Words twisted into nightmarish shapes, screaming at him in letters that shifted when he blinked. "We're here. We've always been here. You invited us." Before he could step back, something slithered across the floor, wet and silent. Something alive. He swung the flashlight and froze. A figure crouched at the far end of the basement, entirely human in shape, but impossibly distorted. Its head twisted at an unnatural angle, its fingers long, spindly, and dripping the same black liquid pooling at Daniel's feet. It tilted its head, and a grin split its face, wider than any human mouth should stretch. Daniel stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of a dusty rug. His flashlight wavered, casting the basement in jerky shadows. The figure didn't move quickly, it didn't need to. His crawling, deliberate advance was worse, each step measured, almost mocking. The closer it came, the more Daniel noticed the horrific details. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were sunken hollows, yet they seemed to follow him with terrible awareness. Its grin widened unnaturally as the black liquid dripped from its long, clawed fingers. A low, rasping whisper echoed through the basement. "You can't leave. Not yet, not until you see." Daniel tried to scramble up the stairs, but the floorboards beneath his feet groaned and twisted unnaturally, tripping him again. Panic flared, and he screamed, only to realize the sound was swallowed instantly by the oppressive darkness. Then the figure stopped, tilting its head to the side, studying him. A second whisper emerged from nowhere, louder, multi-toned, as if a crowd of voices had erupted from its throat. "We live in every corner, every wall, every shadow." Daniel's eyes darted to the walls, and he saw them moving. Shadows shifted independently, shapes stretching into grotesque forms, creeping toward him. The basement was alive, and it wanted him. Daniel backed against the cold stone wall, trying to make sense of the nightmare surrounding him. The shadows writhed, reaching, clawing at the edges of his vision. Desperate, he grabbed the nearest object, a dusty chest tucked into a corner, and threw it toward the advancing darkness. It hit the floor with a loud crash, momentarily scattering the shadows. In that brief window, something caught his eye. A small, leather-bound book wedged between two loose stones in the wall. Hands shaking, he pried it free. The cover was cracked and worn, and inside were pages filled with jagged handwriting, detailing events that had occurred in the house over decades. The first entry made his blood run cold. "They watch through the walls. They dwell in every hidden space. The house is hungry, and it feeds on the living." As he flipped further, each page grew more disturbing. Accounts of previous owners disappearing, rooms sealing themselves, whispers coming from inside the walls, even reports of black liquid appearing in the basement. One page, marked with a thick smear of dark residue, was written in a trembling hand. "The basement door is not the entrance. It is the invitation." The air behind him shifted. The whispering returned, closer, multiple voices now overlapping. "You opened it. Now it's your turn." Daniel realized, with terror, that the house had been waiting for him. Daniel's heart pounded as he clutched the diary. The shadows around him stretched and convulsed, crawling up the walls, slithering along the ceiling. The basement seemed to pulse, as if breathing, inhale, exhale, each beat syncing with his rapid heartbeat. Suddenly, the stairs behind him shifted, wood groaned and warped, stretching impossibly long, leading into corners that shouldn't exist. The exit he had relied on vanished. In its place was a solid wall, slick with the same black liquid that dripped from the figure's fingers. Panicked, he spun toward the diary, desperate for a clue. Words on the pages seemed to writhe, twisting into new shapes. A line he hadn't seen before glared at him. "The house remembers who you are. It will not let you go." The whispers grew deafening, coming from every corner. Each word resonated deep in his skull. Inside, inside, inside. Then reality fractured. The walls melted like wax, revealing countless eyes blinking from the darkness. Eyes of previous victims, trapped, staring, pleading. Daniel realized with horror. The house didn't just watch, consumed. And now it had marked him. Daniel slammed the diary shut and hurled it across the basement. The book hit the wall and burst open, scattering pages into the swirling shadows. For a brief moment, the eyes vanished, and the whispers faltered. Seizing the chance, Daniel bolted for the warped stairs, but the floor beneath him buckled, pitching him forward. He crashed into the wall, scraping his hands raw, and looked up to see the figure from before creeping closer, its grin wider than ever. He grabbed a nearby metal pipe, swinging wildly. The figure recoiled, not injured, but its long, black-stained fingers flexed like claws ready to strike. The basement seemed to respond to his fear, the shadows thickening into jagged shapes, slashing at the edges of his vision. Suddenly, the whispers became voices, clear, urgent, frantic. "The key! The key! It's in the walls!" Daniel froze. He had no idea what it meant, but instinct screamed it was his only chance. The figure lunged, and the pipe connected, ringing loudly against its elongated arm. The impact shattered the basement's eerie calm. And then, a loud click echoed from the far wall, followed by a faint vibration under his feet. Something was moving inside the wall. The wall where the vibration came from shimmered slightly, as though the stone itself was liquid. Daniel approached cautiously, swinging the pipe in front of him. His fingers found a narrow crack, and with a trembling hand, he pried it open. Inside, hidden in a small cavity, was a rusted metal key. It was oddly warm to the touch, almost pulsing like it had a heartbeat of its own. Etched into its surface were symbols Daniel didn't recognize, twisting and shifting as if alive. The whispers intensified, now desperate and pleading. "Use it before it's too late." But as soon as he lifted the key, the basement reacted violently. The shadows recoiled, then surged forward, a tide of blackened eyes pressing against him. The distorted figure screamed, a sound that tore through the room like metal on metal. Daniel's mind raced. The diary's earlier warning echoed in his memory. The basement door is not the entrance. It is the invitation. Whatever the key unlocked, it was not for escape. It was for something far worse. Behind him, the wall where the key had been recessed began to pulse, like the heartbeat of the house itself. The figure moved again, faster this time, its grin splitting even wider. Daniel knew he had seconds to act before the basement consumed him entirely. Daniel's hands shook violently as he inserted the key into a small, previously unnoticed keyhole in the far wall. It clicked instantly, and the wall itself seemed to ripple before sliding inward like liquid stone, revealing a narrow doorway bathed in unnatural darkness. A cold gust of air rushed out, carrying whispers that now screamed in unison. "Enter, or remain forever," the figure shrieked, lunging at him. But Daniel dove through the doorway just in time. Behind him, the basement walls slammed together with a deafening crack, trapping the figure inside with the black liquid pooling at its feet. The passage was impossibly long and narrow, with walls that seemed to close in, breathing softly as he ran. Faint, distorted voices echoed from the darkness. Some crying, some laughing, some screaming in agony. At the end of the corridor, he saw a door unlike any other in the house. It was carved from a dark, glossy wood, pulsing faintly as if alive. The key in his hand vibrated in response, almost guiding him toward it. Daniel hesitated. The diary's words haunted him. The house feeds on what it desires most. The door will show you truth, or your end. Swallowing his fear, he inserted the key. The door creaked open, and the basement's darkness poured into the room like a living thing, coiling around him, whispering secrets he wasn't meant to hear. Daniel stumbled through the darkness and found himself in a room that defied logic. The walls were mirrors, reflecting infinite versions of himself, each twisted in pain, fear, and madness. The black liquid dripped from the ceiling, forming shapes that seemed to crawl and writhe toward him. And then he saw it, the most horrifying reflection of all. In one mirror, his own face was smiling, but the smile was wrong. It was the same grotesque grin he had seen on the figure in the basement, stretched impossibly wide, eyes hollow and dark. Behind him, shadows whispered, "You belong here. You've always belonged." The room shifted. The mirrors melted into images of every previous owner, their faces twisted in terror, their bodies contorted as though consumed by the house itself. He realized in horror. Every person who had lived here had become part of the house, trapped, feeding its hunger, their souls sewn into the walls. A sudden, cold hand gripped his shoulder. He spun around, and there was no one there. Only shadows pooling into a humanoid shape, identical to the figure from the basement. A voice hissed directly in his mind. "You wanted to know its secret. Now you know. Now you stay." Daniel screamed, but the sound echoed back from the mirrors, distorted, trapped, feeding the house's growing hunger. The shadowy figure advanced, its grin stretching wider, dripping the black liquid that now pooled across the mirrored floor. Daniel backed against a wall, heart hammering, his mind racing for any escape. The key vibrated violently in his hand, as though it were alive and trying to warn him. Suddenly, a whisper came. Not from the figure, not from the house, but from the diary, which had somehow appeared in front of him. "The house devours those who linger. You have one choice, or all is lost." The doorway behind him, the only path he had entered, was closing, the darkness of the basement seeping toward it like a tide. The mirrors reflected an infinite number of Daniels, each one screaming silently, trapped in the house forever. Daniel realized the terrible truth. The house didn't just consume its victims physically. It trapped their essence, their soul, twisting them into part of its walls, its shadows, its whispers. And now it wanted him. With a trembling hand, he held the key to the pulsing wooden door. He had a single choice. Insert it and see what lay beyond, or face being absorbed entirely into the house's darkness. The shadows surged closer. Time slowed. Daniel's fingers trembled over the keyhole. Daniel's hand shook violently as he turned the key in the pulsing wooden door. The keyhole glowed faintly, and the house groaned, a sound like 1,000 souls screaming at once. The shadows froze, hovering just inches from him, as if holding their breath. The door swung open, revealing not a room, but an endless void. Blackness stretched infinitely, alive with whispers, faces, and writhing shapes. An entire world of those consumed by the house. The air was thick, heavy, pulsing with a hunger that was almost tangible. A single voice, calm and insidious, echoed through the void. "Step inside, and see the truth you sought." Daniel, trembling and drenched in sweat, stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the void swallowed him. Light, time, and space twisted. He felt his body stretch, his thoughts fragment, and his soul being drawn into the walls of the house he had once called home. Behind him, the door slammed shut. The basement was silent again. The handprints on the wall had vanished, leaving only the faded marks of the previous victims. Upstairs, the house settled into an eerie calm, as if satisfied. And somewhere deep within, Daniel's distorted grin appeared in the shadows, joining the others. The house waited, always hungry, always patient, and it would always have another invitation.